LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out about 40 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a great show for you tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And I'll also have several political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday. You can see the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to whatever topics most interest you. Tonight's topics include the SAE fraternity controversy, and some more about race that I'll start with in a moment. I also have quite a few clips on the nuclear negotiations with Iran and the letter that 47 Republican senators sent to the leaders of Iran trying to undermine President Obama's authority. I'll have several clips on Hillary Clinton's ongoing email scandal. And at the end, I'll even have a couple clips on a possible rival to Hillary Clinton in the Democratic nominating process for president, Jim Webb. But like I said, I want to start first with this issue of race, not just with the SAE fraternity, but also in Ferguson, Missouri. There was they fired the police chief, and then there were these protests, and some police officers were shot. And there was breaking news this morning that they caught a suspect who they charged with shooting the two police officers. And one of the most interesting parts about the press conference from the prosecutor, St. Louis County Prosecutor Bob McCulloch, was his claim that the shooter said he wasn't shooting at the police officers, which I will discuss after you see that clip from Bob McCulloch's press conference. This was the first question he got from a reporter after his statement, where he said that the target might not have been the police officers. And the first question he got from a reporter was, what do you mean the target might not have been the police officers? And here's his answer.
Not firing at the police officers.
Well, the evidence developed at this point, and in part on his statement, that he may have had a dispute with some other individuals or felt some dispute. We're not sure we completely buy that part of it, but in any event, it's possible he was firing at some other people, and the officers, of course, were in the back. However, it's still an assault in the first degree. It's a Class A felony.
So do you know what this dispute was about? Who the other?
Well, let me say, first of all, we're not sure there was a dispute. I mean, we have to go on the evidence that we have at this point. Like I said, that investigation is going to continue. There are claims that he's made that he had a bit of a dispute with some other people who were there, which had nothing to do with the demonstrations that were going on, but that he was firing at them as opposed to directly at the police officers. So
he was in the car, you said. He was in the vehicle driving.
So that's the breaking news from Clayton, Missouri. I always find it kind of weird to watch press conferences from Clayton, Missouri in front of the Justice Center, because I worked there. I worked in a different building while they were building that Justice Center, and then like the last half of my career as a public defender in St. Louis County was in an office in that Justice Center that Bob McCulloch was giving his press conference, where Bob McCulloch was giving his press conference, and you can see he gave all this new information about Jeffrey Williams, this 20-year-old African-American suspect who he later said in the press conference was involved in the demonstrations earlier in the day, and then claimed that he was shooting at someone else he had a dispute with. I don't know. This is just speculation, and who knows what the investigation will eventually turn up. But that story about how he was shooting at someone else, it almost sounds like the police got him to confess by saying, well, if you were shooting at someone other than the cops, you better tell us, because if you were shooting at the cops, you're going to be in big trouble. So let us know if it was something else. And that's how they got the confession. That's kind of like one of those cop tricks that they sometimes use, where they make you think that confessing to the crime is actually helping you out by avoiding some much worse situation. So like I said, that's just speculation. I don't know if there's anything to that, but that's the first thought that came to my mind when I heard that explanation from Bob McCulloch there. And the next clip I want to show has to do with some of the previous events. this demonstration before the police officers were shot, and they both survived, if you didn't hear, but the demonstration beforehand was after the police chief in Ferguson, Missouri, and also the city manager resigned, and that's something that Bill Maher made fun of on HBO's Real Time last Friday over in this clip.
Now, in other racist news, over in Ferguson, Missouri, the police chief there did resign, and then they had a big protest. See, this is what I don't understand. You get what you want, and then you protest. What do we want? Justice. When did we get it? Yesterday.
Now, it may seem funny that there were protests after the police chief and the city manager resigned, but that was all just the first step, and there's a lot more to it, and there's this whole movement that I actually have a clip from Sharyl in Eiffel, who's a lawyer for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and she addressed that specific issue seriously that Bill Maher was making fun of over on CBS's Face the Nation this morning. Was it Face the Nation? Let me just double check that. Yeah, CBS's Face the Nation talking to Bob Schieffer over in this clip.
What is your take? You know, some of the residents who were interviewed in Ferguson this week said they didn't understand why people were still protesting down there. After all, I mean, they'd gotten rid of half the police force and the people there. Why do you think those demonstrations go on?
Well, in many ways, I think they have to go on because the work is not complete. In fact, we're at the moment where the work really has to push forward, and that is that the Department of Justice now is entering into negotiations with the leaders of Ferguson about how they're going to change that police department. And I think this is the time when the protests actually have to become more focused and more targeted in terms of thinking about what is the result that you want. Elections are next month in Ferguson, and you've got city council elections and African Americans running for city council seats at numbers they never did in the past. So there's a real opportunity for change, and I think the people who are out want to make sure that that change actually happens. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think this discomfort that we're all feeling actually, even though it feels like we're going backwards, that's actually when we go forwards. It's just like, you know, in Selma, it's just like on that Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's these moments of confrontation when we actually get to see what is really happening in America, whether it's that video that shocks us all and that's so repugnant. The most dangerous times for race in America is when we're papering over what the reality is.
So I thought that was an interesting analysis, especially the part about how when there's conflict, that's when we make progress. And Sharyl and Eiffel there did go over some of the reasons that that the protesters are continuing to protest. Whatever Bill Maher's joke there, you know, it may sound a little funny, but there are definitely reasons to protest. And she talked about the elections, and there's actually a movement to recall the mayor of Ferguson, Missouri, and some other political activity. I want to show a clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Their Justice Department correspondent Pierre Thomas had a more extended look at what's going on in Ferguson, and actually talked to another one of their national reporters, Kendis Gibson. And there's even a clip from Jimmy Kimmel, which for some reason I think is going to get me a copyright claim on this video, but I guess we'll see after I play it here.
When shots rang out early Thursday morning, hitting two police officers in Ferguson, it was clear this community was far from healed. Now the manhunt continues for the cold-blooded shooter before he can strike again.
This was a damn punk who was trying to sow discord in an area that is trying to get its act together.
ABC's Kendis Gibson is on the ground in Ferguson.
The county police say they have several leads, but so far no suspects or persons of interest. In the meantime, there's a petition circulating seeking to recall the city of Ferguson's mayor. He says he has no plans to step down.
The shooting came after a purge of city officials, including the police chief and city manager, in the wake of that blistering Justice Department report that found systemic bias by police against African Americans in Ferguson.
There was a whole structure there, according to the Justice Department report, that indicated both racism and just a disregard for what law enforcement's supposed to do.
The Justice Department accusing the city of using traffic stops of minorities as a means of raising revenue for the city. Some had hoped the tumult in Ferguson was coming to an end. But this week's shootings renewed tensions in this small town, still standing in the shadow of the death of a black unarmed teenager at the hands of a white police officer. And now a volatile mix, a shooter on the loose as the protests go on. For this week, Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
Of course, they have arrested a suspect, as I showed at the beginning of the show, and that's going to be out of date in a lot of the clips I'm showing because all these shows came before the news that they had arrested a suspect. But in terms of the political activity and the actual electoral capacity to bring change through voting and other type of organizing that Pierre Thomas was talking about, and that Sharyl and Eiffel was talking about. I want to show an additional clip on that. This is also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George was interviewing one of the congressmen from the St. Louis area, William Lacey Clay, and he talked about political organization and voting as a way to get change rather than violence over in this clip.
How about this effort to recall the mayor? Do you support that?
The real test for the voters of Ferguson will be April the 7th in their municipal election and in the surrounding communities, George. If they get enough signatures on a petition to recall the mayor, then another election will be set, and I will go about educating the voters of Ferguson on what their rights are and how they can change their city government for the better. You know, out of this practices and patterns report from DOJ, you can tell that it was system-wide. The way they targeted people of that community to as really a ATM machine to derive revenue in order for the city government to function. So they need to clean house from top to bottom.
So clean house from top.
Now that seems to be the common theme of most of these people I've been showing here about how there has to be change. And even Bill Maher said that there was reason for change. He just thought that they had already gotten some change when they continued to protest. But that is not a universally held view. I want to show an additional clip from This Week with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, where George interviewed a Missouri Senator, Roy Blunt, and asked him what's going to happen next in Missouri. And he really concentrated on being supportive of the police, although he did call the shooting of Michael Brown a tragedy for everyone, and that turned into a tragedy. And then he actually says that what's happening shows why police have to be militarized. He turns it into an argument in favor of police militarization, believe it or not, as you can see in this clip.
Let me turn now to the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. Of course, you're the senator from Missouri. We saw this week those officers shot after the demonstrations, after the city managers decided to resign, the police chief decided to resign. What should happen now in Ferguson?
Well, you know, we need to look for everything we can to move forward. Ferguson and the country is better than it was 50 years ago when John Lewis led that march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but we're not nearly all we should be. We ought to be working on that. I think what happened this week goes back to August when so much sudden obligation was placed on how the police were responding to peaceful protesters and not so peaceful protesters after the unfortunate, the tragic end of the life of Michael Brown and all the tragedy that brought on everybody involved. But we need to begin to look at how we move forward. You don't move forward by talking about things like the militarization of the police, which really is decisions that need to be made by the police of how they protect themselves and how they protect others in the hard job they have to do. And nobody's opposed to peaceful protest here, but at some point that protest needs to lead to what do we do about schools that need to work better than they're working, and support systems for young men and women that need to be more than they are for people who don't have all the encouragement that they need and they don't wind up with opportunities. We need to be focused on how we move forward.
Now, I don't know exactly how you get an argument in favor of militarization of the police. I guess it's because of he's blaming the conflict between the protesters and the police on the protesters and saying that the police reacted militarily, or they militarized themselves in reaction. But for those who remember the sequence of events, it was really a amazingly militarized police force that sort of set the frame of the whole conflict, where it was over militarized from the beginning, which is why I think that was kind of a silly argument. And speaking of silly arguments, I want to show, I guess this is a joke, so it has a right to be somewhat silly, but I think it doesn't even really have the kernel of truth in there that you need for a joke to be really funny. From HBO's Real Time, one of his new rules had to do with what the police need to do to clear some of this up over here.
New rule: in order to advance the cause of racial progress in America, the police have to shoot an unarmed white man. Doesn't matter who, just pull up to a Pete's or a Coffee Bean. Ask the first guy you see coming out the door to prove he paid for that chai tea latte. And when he reaches in his pocket for the receipt, kill him. I mean, it's not like he had a choice. He could have been going for a gun.
That's kind of ridiculous, because the police actually do shoot unarmed white men, but I guess you can give a little leeway to Bill Maher since it's a joke. It's not a news show, so I guess he's trying to emphasize the point that there are so disproportionately large number of unarmed black men compared to unarmed white men in relation to their percentage of the population. So I can give him that, and that's not the only kind of joke I saw in this whole area, but the next joke I want to show isn't supposed to be a joke. It's this is the introduction to Fox News Sunday, where the only thing they talked about in terms of race this week, the whole SAE fraternity thing did not come up at all on Fox News Sunday, but they did talk about the shooting of the police officers in Ferguson, Missouri. They called it an ambush. They assumed it was an ambush of the police officers, like happened after the Eric Garner protests, those two police officers who actually were ambushed and killed in New York. But based on that clip I showed from Bob McCulloch, it's possible these police officers weren't ambushed. They were collateral damage or unintended victims, although who knows how that's going to turn out. But here you can see Fox News Sunday saying the police were ambushed, and that was the only racial news they reported. And in fact, they said this reignited racial tensions like they hadn't already been ignited over in this clip.
Plus, 2 Ferguson, Missouri police officers are ambushed, reigniting racial tensions.
This was not someone trying to bring healing to Ferguson. This was a damn punk.
Our Sunday group weighs in.
Well, that Eric Holder punk comment looks like it might be a little closer to the truth than anything else that was in that Fox News intro. The ambush and the reigniting racial tensions, I don't know what that was all about. And then the final clip on the whole race issue I want to show before I show a few other clips on specifically on SAE. But before I get to the SAE clip, I want to show you how CNN handled this. They had both the Ferguson police shootings and the SAE. This is sort of a transitional clip. You can see, unlike Fox News Sunday, they reported both of them in sort of a comparison or juxtaposition over this clip.
Got an officer down, shots fired at their station.
The heinous and cowardly attacks that occurred against 2 brave law enforcement officers in Ferguson, Missouri.
He was unarmed.
The systematic targeting of young black males.
Who's street? Our street! Who's street? Our street!
Those are just a few scenes from across the country this week. Videos like this, they remind us how far we still have to go with race relations in America. So,
And so then Dana Bash had this extended conversation with the student body presidents of 4 different universities, although I'm not going to show you any clips from that. It was kind of interesting, though. And instead, though, I want to move on to some specific coverage of the SAE fraternity incident. You saw some quick clips there of the video that surfaced of these fraternity pledges chanting this racist song about how there wouldn't be any N-words in the fraternity, and it was kind of nasty. And I'm going to show you sort of an extended report on it that includes a quick interview with one of the only 2 African-American members of that chapter of the fraternity ever, and also shows how the fraternity has hired this former lawyer for the McVeigh bomber guy, and I'll talk about it a little more after you watch that clip over here.
The video is just 9 seconds long. It's
Tim McVeigh, that was the name I was trying to think of. I don't know why I blanked on Tim McVeigh's first name, but anyway, here's that report.
The video is just 9 seconds long. Its consequences could last a lifetime. At least for these 2 fraternity brothers, Parker Rice and Levi Pettit. This morning they've both been expelled, and either they or their parents have written public apologies. But what happened on that bus last weekend affects more than those 2. It sparked protest,
Not on us!
and led to the entire Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity being kicked off campus.
How could this be my house?
Meet one of only 2 black SAE members in the history of the University of Oklahoma.
I don't think that they were ever deserving of the letters because those letters mean something.
But the local chapter doesn't think it deserved to be evicted either. They hired prominent defense attorney Stephen Jones, who knows a thing or two about taking on unpopular clients. He defended Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh.
Every 19-year-old male
I don't know what happened there. Can someone tell me what was the last clip I showed? Does anyone know what the last clip I showed was? Wait, I'm trying to go back. Oh, I showed that. Let me see here. Okay, I sort of scrolled through. Sorry about that big blank spot. I'm going to replay you the introductory clip on the SAE fraternity incident. This is from ABC reporter, let me make sure I get his name right. Didn't I already enter? Oh yeah, Ryan Owen, reporting on the incident with the SAE fraternity. He also talks to one of the only African American members of that chapter of the fraternity, and he also talks to the lawyer for the Oklahoma City bomber Tim McVeigh, who is now representing that fraternity. And you can, I'll talk about all of that a little more after I try once again to show that clip over here.
The video is just 9 seconds long. Its consequences could last a lifetime. at least for these two fraternity brothers, Parker Rice and Levi Pettit. This morning, they've both been expelled, and either they or their parents have written public apologies. But what happened on that bus last weekend affects more than those two. It sparked protest,
Not on us!
and led to the entire Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity being kicked off campus.
How could this be my house?
Meet one of only 2 black SAE members in the history of the University of Oklahoma.
I don't think that they were ever deserving of the letters because those letters mean something.
But the local chapter doesn't think it deserved to be evicted either. They hired prominent defense attorney Stephen Jones, who knows a thing or two about taking on unpopular clients. He defended Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh.
Every 19-year-old male is entitled to 5 minutes of foolishness. I think there was a premature rush to judgment.
And it's not just about SAE and racism. 60 deaths linked to frats over the past decade, accusations of sexual assault, and the hazing horror stories dating almost 2 centuries. Earlier this year, Dartmouth College tried to crack down on dangerous debauchery by banning hard alcohol and putting an end to pledging. It's a problem they've tried to fix before.
Specially trained teams of student counselors visit dormitories and fraternity houses each week to talk about the use and abuse of alcohol.
For years, these stories have overshadowed the good works like charity and community service. About 750,000 undergraduates are Greek. 17 U.S. presidents pledged in college. But now that one 9-second video seems to be overshadowing all of that yet again. For this week, Ryan Owens, ABC News.
So, there, finally finished that clip. Is that the second time I showed the clip? I'm not sure. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I stopped broadcasting. My stream was no good or whatever. I don't know what happened there. This seems to be like a lot of errors today. I started late, as my live viewers know, so I'm sorry about that. And it's just been, I'm really tired today because yesterday I actually flew down to Los Angeles, and here you can see I tried out for Jeopardy. I got this cool pen. I passed the online test a little while, or about a year ago, and then they just called me in for a live audition, so I don't know if anything will come of that, but that may be why I'm a little bit tired today, but I don't know if it's why all this stuff is crashing. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, you saw that intro on the SAE fraternity, and that gave you a lot of background on what happened and what's going to happen. And the other clip on that I want to show is, well, I have 2 more clips. First is over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. One of the guests was Arianna Huffington, who started the Huffington Post, longtime Politico from California here, and she's originally from Greece, and since she is from Greece, this is a topic she had something to say about, fraternities, which originate in Greece, and so here's her comment on that in this clip.
You know, we Greeks gave you fraternities and sororities.
That's right.
And I think we have to take them back.
Yeah.
I think you've basically screwed it up.
Yes.
And, after all...
It's an anachronism.
It's an anachronism.
It's
we also gave you nude Olympics. Remember, that's how it started. And
really? It was nude? You mean the wrestling?
Nude. At the beginning, it was nude Olympics.
Right.
But, we kind of evolved. And we started wearing clothes, which is particularly good during the Winter Olympics. But my point is that, fraternities, it's not just the racist singing. The sexual assault, 60 people have died in fraternity incidents in the last 10 years. I mean, at what point do we say, really, why are we still justifying
because
their...
So, yeah, you can see there that they are really trashing fraternities, and she talked about the 60 deaths over the last decade that you also saw reported in that ABC clip that I played once or twice. And I think that this video did show some of the racist aspects of some fraternities, and and I remember fraternities having some of these same problems with racism, sexual assault, and alcohol abuse back, like they showed in that ABC clip, back in the 80s. when I was an undergraduate. And so there's a lot of justified approbation being given to fraternities for their bad behavior that started from this whole SAE incident. But one thing I think went a little bit too far, and I noticed this in the media, was when they expelled the 2 students who were involved in the chant. That's actually a violation of the First Amendment when it's a government university doing the expulsion. To expel someone for voicing racist opinion on some like fraternity trip that's not even in class or on campus, or I mean, it's pretty clearly against the First Amendment, that expulsion. And I eventually did see some coverage of that, but to show you like the way most of the media missed the whole First Amendment issue in those expulsions, I'm going to show you how Bob Schieffer praised David Boren, the president of the University in Oklahoma that expelled those 2 students and kicked the frat off campus, which actually that may be more justifiable under the First Amendment, despite what Stephen Jones said in that previous clip, the lawyer for Tim McVeigh. But anyway, here's Bob Schieffer's commentary where he misses the whole First Amendment issue and even talks about hate speech, which is a kind of nebulous First Amendment term, over in this clip.
In a time when real leadership is such a rare commodity, I want to recognize the decisive action of Oklahoma University President David Boren. I knew David Boren when he was a U.S. Senator. He was a good one, and since joining the university, he has been a strong leader in higher education. When that nauseating video of OU fraternity boys singing racist songs showed up on the internet, Boren had all kinds of options: open an investigation, confer with his trustees, maybe convene a focus group. But he moved with such speed, I doubt he did any of that. He simply expelled those involved and threw the fraternity off campus. No ifs, ands, and buts, he said. You are out of here, and don't let the screen door hit you on the way out. I'm not surprised in our litigious society that the fraternity has now hired a lawyer who may sue unless Boren reconsiders and joins in making this a teachable moment. I think what's teachable is pretty obvious. Actions have consequences, and hateful words are dangerous things, sometimes as harmful to those who deliver them as those they are aimed at. If the students didn't know that before, well, now they do.
Well, I mean, hateful words may be dangerous to some extent, but they aren't actions to the extent that actions have consequences, and they're protected by the First Amendment for, to voice your opinions and not get kicked out of a government school for it. If you're not harassing someone, if you're not targeting someone, I mean, there are certainly exceptions, but none of them apply to that chant on the bus that I can see. And there was a little bit of coverage of that on a couple shows, but it took a long time for the media to see that First Amendment issue. Although the rest of it, the nasty things that go on in fraternities, I'm not defending that. I'm just pointing out that one First Amendment issue. Now I'm going to move on to my next topic. So about half the clips for the whole show, I think it's like 18 of them, are going to be on the nuclear negotiations with Iran. There are 2 main parts of this. The first part has to do with this letter that 47 Republican senators sent to the leaders of Iran, of all things, saying you can't trust President Obama, which is kind of weird in and of itself. And it was kind of condescending because it started with this part about how it's come to our attention that the leaders of Iran may not understand our constitutional system, that if you make a deal with the president, it may not last past his presidency. And anyway, before I get to all that, the most general clip I have on this is a report from Martha Raddatz, where she shows President Obama in an interview that's going to be released by Vice News tomorrow. This is a very short clip of that and some other background on this whole Iran conflict with the Republicans over here.
President Obama taking his latest shot at those 47 Republican senators in an interview airing tomorrow on Vice News.
I'm embarrassed for them to address a letter to the Ayatollah, who they claim is our mortal enemy, It's close to unprecedented.
The uproar over the letter growing just 16 days deadline for nuclear talks between Iran and the U.S. The letter warns any deal with Iran must be approved by Congress or the next president could revoke it with the stroke of a pen. Iran's Ayatollah firing back, saying it was a sign of Washington disintegrating. And now even some who signed it having second thoughts on the strategy.
Maybe that wasn't exactly the best way to do that.
But the man who wrote it isn't backing down.
We're simply trying to say that Congress has a constitutional role to approve any deal to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
And Senator Marco Rubio took his defense of the letter and frustration with the talks even further, saying negotiations were hurting the fight against ISIS.
In essence, the way we've proceeded with our negotiations in Iran have impacted our trust level with these critical allies in this coalition.
Senator, that actually is flat wrong also. Flat wrong. This is about a nuclear weapon potential. That's it. And the president has made it absolutely clear they will not get a nuclear weapon.
The White House is firm it does not need congressional approval for a deal at this point, but down the road, if the president wants to roll back sanctions against Iran, it might be a different story. For This Week.
So yeah, that was the Martha Raddatz report with some background on the 47 senators' letter and how some senators are not happy that they signed it at this point, but none of those senators were out on the Sunday morning shows this morning. But one, I guess, like John McCain on Fox News on Greta Van Susteren's show earlier this week, of all people, said that he had second thoughts on it, that they were rushed because they were trying to get out for a snowstorm. And I think, what is it, Senator Ron Johnson also said he might have some second thoughts. But the ones who were on the shows, Roy Blunt, the senator from Missouri, was on right after that Martha Raddatz report, and you can see he says he doesn't have any regrets when George Stephanopoulos asked him about it over here.
Roy Blunt of Missouri, you signed the letter, Senator. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. And we just heard in that piece Senator John McCain saying some second thoughts about the strategy. Well, your colleague Ron Johnson also says now that it might have been done in a different way. Do you have any second thoughts?
No, I really don't, George. I think what was interesting here was how aggressive the administration reacted, how aggressively the Iranians reacted. That letter was essentially an op-ed. It was released in every paper in the country. It said what, frankly, I'd been saying for a year and what the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's been saying for 6 months, which is there is a constitutional role here for the Senate if you want this agreement to be permanent, binding, and long-term.
But one of the things
So, yeah, no backing down from Senator Roy Blunt. And if you want to see a more aggressive reaction in this controversy, I want to show a clip of Secretary of State John Kerry, who was over on CBS's Face the Nation, interviewed by their reporter Margaret Brennan. And he really trashes the leader of this letter group, Senator Tom Cotton. And you can see that clip over here.
What I do know is that this letter was absolutely calculated directly to interfere with these negotiations. It specifically inserts itself directly to the leader of another country, saying, don't negotiate with these guys because we're going to change this, which, by the way, is not only contrary to the Constitution with respect to the executive's right to negotiate, but it is incorrect because they cannot change an executive agreement. So it's false information and directly calculated to interfere and basically say, don't negotiate with them, you got to negotiate with 535 members of Congress.
But
that's unprecedented.
And
unprecedented.
They have to negotiate with you. You're the one who has to sit at that table.
Well, I understand, but it's unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this. Now, in fairness, look, I don't know how many people really focus completely on it, but I do know that the effect and the intent of the author was to basically say, don't do this deal. And by the way, that's to say that before there even is a deal. I mean, it's like, giving people a grade on a test before the test is even written, let alone given. It's wrong, it's unprecedented, And I hope it hasn't made it very difficult here. And by the way, this is not just the United States of America negotiating. This is China, Russia, Germany, France, Great Britain.
So how do you clear the air? Are you going to apologize for this letter?
Not on your life. I'm not going to apologize for for an unconstitutional and unthought out action by somebody who's been in the United States Senate for 60-some days. That's just inappropriate. I will explain very clearly that Congress does not have the right to change an executive agreement. Another president may have a different view about it, but if we do our job correctly, all of these nations, they all have an interest in making sure this is in fact a proven peaceful program. And it would be derelict if we allow some gaping hole in this program that doesn't do so. But you know, let's see what it is first. And I think this applies to everybody, incidentally, who's been trying to judge this before, in fact, the deal, if it can be sealed, is sealed.
I like that part, this unconstitutional and unthought out action by someone who's been in the Senate for less than 60 days. Of course, he's talking about Senator Tom Cotton, who was the primary author of the letter, and he's the one who rounded up all the other senators. Although I have seen some people say it's a failure of leadership because, years ago, the Senate leadership would never let a freshman senator do this kind of thing. But speaking of that freshman senator, Senator Tom Cotton was on CBS's Face the Nation after that interview with Secretary of State John Kerry, and he reacted to some of Secretary of Kerry's comments and kind of defended himself, as you can see in this clip.
Heard what the Secretary said. Unprecedented, inappropriate, unthought out, unconstitutionally wrong. What were you trying to accomplish, Senator?
Bob, I and 46 other senators are focused on stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and we wanted to be crystal clear that Iran's leaders got the message that in our constitutional system, while the president negotiates deals, Congress has to approve them for them to be lasting and binding. And I have to say, I'm surprised by Secretary's comments this morning because just a few days ago he testified before the Senate to say that any deal would not be legally binding. And now he says that future Congresses can't change a mere executive agreement if we disagree with them or if a future president disagrees with them. That's not the way our constitutional system works, and it's certainly not the way we should be negotiating with Iran.
Did you talk to the Secretary of State? Did you talk to any Democrats in the Senate before you chose to go directly to the Iranians?
I and many other senators, Republican and Democrat, have expressed our sincere and long-held intent that Congress must approve any nuclear deal with Iran for months. In fact, going back almost 2 years ago, I was part of a 400-person majority in the House of Representatives that sought to impose more sanctions on Iran. We did reach out to some Democratic offices, but I can tell you that the viewpoint is widely shared, and I don't see how anyone could dispute that if a deal is reached with Iran that is not approved by the Congress, then future Congresses and future presidents don't have to accept it in our constitutional system.
Well, Senator, it's not exactly news to say that the Congress can pass laws to change whatever laws or agreements are on the books. But why did you decide to try to convince the Iranians that they needed to be wary of dealing with the United States? Why not take your argument to the American people? Why didn't you write an open letter in the New York Times or something?
Iran's leaders needed to hear the message loud and clear. I can tell you they are not hearing that message from Geneva. In fact, if you look at the response of the Iranian Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, it underscores the need for the letter in the first place because he made it clear that he does not understand our constitutional system. He thinks that international law can override our Constitution.
So he's not backing down, obviously. I mean, even Roy Blunt wasn't backing down. You wouldn't expect Senator Tom Cotton to back down, but I thought Bob Schieffer did a fairly good job of cross-examining him on some of the problems with the letter, and I'm going to show another clip of Bob Schieffer doing that cross-examination here. He uses a quote from Madeleine Albright that sort of puts the actions of these 47 Republican senators in pretty stark terms over in this clip.
Earlier today, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright told our local affiliate here, WUSA, that what you did was akin to during the Cuban Missile Crisis. If a senator had called Nikita Khrushchev and told him he couldn't be certain that President Kennedy could back up any deal he made with him. Do you see a comparison there?
No, I would disagree. And Secretary Albright was part of the Clinton administration that entered into the fundamentally flawed agreement for work with North Korea. But more fundamentally, what we did was to send a clear message to a dictatorial regime. We didn't coddle or conciliate with the dictators in Iran. We told them that the American people, 71% of the American people in a recent poll, will not accept a deal that puts Iran on the path to a nuclear weapon. 71% of the American people are right, and that's for whom we're speaking.
What do you...
Seemed like a gratuitous swipe at Madeleine Albright in the middle of that answer there. And I want to show one more clip from Senator Tom Cotton's interview with Bob Schieffer. Here, Bob Schieffer asks if he thinks he's weakening the American negotiating position, and you'll see he claims no, he's actually strengthening it over in this clip.
Do you feel that you have not weakened the president's hand here, and do you have any regrets about the way you went about this?
No regrets at all. And if the president and the Secretary of State were intent on driving a hard bargain, they would be able to point to this letter and say, they're right, as Secretary Kerry said on Wednesday in a Senate testimony, any lasting deal needs to be approved by Congress. When past senators like Joe Biden or Jesse Helms communicated directly with foreign leaders, past presidents like Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton did just that. The fact that President Obama doesn't see this letter as a way to get more leverage at the negotiating table just underscores that he is not negotiating for the hardest deal possible. He is negotiating a deal that is going to put Iran on the path to a bomb.
Right.
If not today or tomorrow, then 10 years from now.
I'm not sure what he meant by he's not negotiating for the hardest deal possible, but I mean, his general argument that he's not undermining the Obama administration, I don't really buy it. And I'm going to show some more clips on this letter. You know, at the beginning of the show, I noticed someone had posted, was it John Smith, the name of the poster? Several questions, one of which was whether I thought that what the senators did violated the Logan Act, which says that you can't engage in your own foreign policy when the executive branch is involved, or when the U.S. government, without U.S. government authority, you can't engage in your own foreign policy. But the Logan Act is like from, what is it, 1798, 1802, I can't remember, somewhere around 1800, and it's never been enforced, which means that there's a legal doctrine that says if it has never been enforced, then it may not even be valid. It also, there are a couple big exceptions. First, the State Department says it never said once quite a while ago that it doesn't apply to Congress, and there are some constitutional reasons that it probably couldn't apply to Congress. So even though I know some people on the left have been pushing this idea that they should prosecute these senators for violating the Logan Act, I think that's kind of silly. I researched it, and there's just not any legal basis for that. But I do think that the letter is not helpful for U.S. foreign policy, and it's kind of a stunt, and it's kind of silly. And I'm going to show a few more clips of Republican senators trying to justify it. First, a couple from CNN State of the Union. Dana Bash had on the head of the Senate Republicans, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and he would not back off from the letter, although he did kind of dodge the whole question of whether it was inappropriate process, as you can see over in this clip.
Thank you very much for
Glad
coming
to be with
in.
you.
Let's just talk first about the timing of this. There's a lot of discussion about the fact that this was done in a rushed way, signed quickly before senators wanted to get out of town for this snowstorm. When did Senator Cotton come to you with this letter? Explain the process.
Well, Dana, first let me just say I think this is a good case of selective outrage. I remember reading about Senator Robert Byrd when he was the majority leader flying to Moscow during the negotiations over the SALT II treaty, explaining to the Russians the Senate's role in treaty ratification. And John Kerry, when he was a senator, flew to Managua and met with the communist dictator there, Daniel Ortega, and accused the Reagan administration of engaging in terrorism. So look, members of Congress expressing themselves about important matters, not only at home but around the world, is not unprecedented. So the main point here, I think everybody needs to understand, is the president is about to make what we believe will be a very bad deal. He clearly doesn't want Congress involved in it at all, and we're worried about it. We don't think he ought to make a bad deal with one of the worst regimes in the world.
Can you tell?
So you can see there that Mitch McConnell has his talking points and he's going to stick to them. And I'm not going to show every time he stuck to the talking points. I'm going to show one more time where he talked about it being a bad deal as his answer to the flaws with the whole letter and the process of the letter. Here you can see Dana Bash point out to him how the letter was really patronizing and unhelpful, and tries to get him to talk about the letter, and instead he talks about how it's a bad deal and we have to focus on the substance. And he really stuck to that talking point. If you click on the link down in the video description and you watch the whole interview for yourself, I'm not going to show every time he stuck to these same talking points, but I'm going to show one more time over in this clip.
Let me just read part of the letter so our viewers have a sense of what we're talking about. It said, "It has come to our attention while observing your nuclear negotiations with our government that you might not fully understand our constitutional system. We will consider any agreement regarding your nuclear weapons program that is not approved by the Congress as nothing more than an executive agreement between President Obama and Ayatollah Khamenei." So the criticism that we're hearing is it comes across as patronizing and even juvenile. And there's some questioning whether it was appropriate for a young senator to take the lead on this, somebody who has only a couple months' experience in the Senate.
Look, all of this is a distraction away from the point here. The president has said we're going to either reach a deal or not reach a deal with one of the worst regimes in the world by March the 24th that will probably allow them to keep their nuclear infrastructure in place. This is a big, important issue, not to be sort of trivialized by the discussion that goes on back and forth among members of Congress about this hugely important issue.
But isn't this a distraction of your making? That this whole conversation is about what was appropriate and not, because this is a letter that you all wrote that has raised those questions.
Well, the administration would like to have a distraction, but the point is the substance of the matter. Are they or are they not about to make a very bad deal that will allow the Iranians, one of the worst regimes in the world, to continue to have their nuclear infrastructure? The same country that's fomenting problems in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen. That's the point, the substance of the matter. This is a very, very important issue.
So like I said, I'm going to spare you like the 3 or 4 other times that Mitch McConnell basically gave that same answer when Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union tried to get him to talk about the letter rather than the substance of the bad deal and the process and the conflict with the White House. And he just basically stuck to those same talking points over and over again. But I sparing you those additional clips, I'm still going to show you a couple more on this topic of the letter, and then I'm going to get a little more to the substance in a minute, or not the substance, but a different conflict with Congress other than this letter. But first, here's Senator Roger Wicker. I think he's senator from Mississippi. He's a Republican, and he was over on NBC's Meet the Press with Chuck Todd, and Chuck Todd tried to get him to express some regret over the letter, but no, he didn't have any regrets, and his basic reasoning for not regretting sending this letter is because Iran is scary, and he referred to former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think, Mike Mullen, who was a previous guest on the show when he answered the question here.
Wicker, let me just start with you. This morning, I know some senators have regretted some parts of the letter. Do you have any regrets on signing the letter, on who it was addressed to, on how this controversy bubbled up this week?
No, I don't have any regrets at all. I stand by the letter, and I think it's interesting that we've had so much talk about process, just like we had talk about process with Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. rather than dealing with the substance. And I was struck by what I think I heard Admiral Mullen say. He said he fears Iran more than he fears the Islamic State, and he has reason to say that. I mean, this is the country that we're negotiating with on this agreement. They are the chief exporter of terrorism around in that region. The president's own Northern Command admiral just last week said they are not abiding by the international inspection regime, and they're developing new intercontinental ballistic missiles. So I think the substance should be that this is a country that we're negotiating with, that frankly our president and our Secretary of State feel pretty comfortable with, and I don't have much confidence that any agreement that they make they will abide by.
But let me.
So I don't know what he meant by the president and the Secretary of State are comfortable with Iran, because they often say negative things about Iran, but they're just trying to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, like the Republicans also seem to want, apparently. But you saw there the response from the senator from Mississippi, Roger Wicker. And now I'm going to move over to a Fox News Sunday clip. This is Senator John Barrasso responding to actually a fairly tough question on the topic from the host Chris Wallace about whether about Iran's response to this. And you can see here in this is let me just check here. Oh yeah, whether this letter is going to give Iran an excuse if the talks fail, to say that it was because of the Republican letter. You know, they can blame the Republicans rather than Iran getting the blame, where it would be the Obama administration would be in a stronger position if they could blame the Iranians for the talks failing. And you can see John Barrasso as having none of that over in this clip.
Yeah, that's not my point, sir. What I'm saying is by sending this letter, you could have sent it to the president, you could have sent it to the American people. By sending it to the leader of Iran, haven't you given him an excuse, and the hardliners an excuse, to drop out saying, hey, 47 Republican senators say this is worthless?
I think by sending that letter, we focused the attention where it should be on the debate about the deal. The president hasn't wanted to talk about it for 6 years, Iran with a nuclear weapon. Now the focus is on what it means if Iran gets a nuclear weapon to use themselves, to give to terrorists who can use it against us. And this is all about Iran and sanctions. They want the money. Iran wants the money so they can then spend it in other ways for terrorism.
I've got to...
So that was one of several clips of Senator John Barrasso defending this letter. I'm not going to show you the other ones, although I am going to show an example of Chris Wallace letting a Democrat say the opposite argument. This is from earlier in the show, and this is Representative Adam Schiff, who was mostly on to talk about the Hillary Clinton email scandal, and I'll have something on that later. But here he is. Chris Wallace basically lets him say what he wants. Just says, you wanted to talk about this? What do you have to say about it over in this clip?
I know you want to talk about this letter that the 47 Republicans sent to the leaders of Iran about the talks over a nuclear deal.
I think it's appalling to interfere in a negotiation like this that the commander-in-chief is engaged in. I think that Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate members, ought to keep their powder dry. Let's see whether there is a deal. Let's see what the terms of that deal are, but I am shocked, and I think it's a terrible thing for the institution.
We're going to have more on that later. Congressman.
So that's the last clip on the Republican letter I want to show, but there is this related topic on the Iran negotiations that sort of stems from the letter about it's not the substance of the deal, but it has to do with the process as to whether Congress really should be involved at some point. And that's sort of a conflict that's also ongoing as to whether, when the White House makes this deal with Iran, if Congress should have to approve it. And I'm going to show several clips on that. First is another clip from Senator John Barrasso. This is Chris Wallace talking to him about what John Kerry said, and what the White House said, but this is actually kind of a funny clip. I just want to make sure that this is the right one, right? Yeah, right. He starts off as if he's going to show Senator John Barrasso a clip of Secretary John Kerry defending the White House position, but Fox News Sunday also had a technical glitch. I'm not the only one, I guess, who has technical problems, and they didn't show the clip. And Chris Wallace did a really bad job of summarizing what was there, and then they went to this White House statement that didn't really give much of support for that side of the argument. And instead of actually being a tough question for Senator John Barrasso, it ended up being a pretty easy question because there was no real substance to the opposing argument that Chris Wallace was giving to him in the question. And you'll see Chris Wallace even puts this dig at Secretary John Kerry, saying that he never sounded better than the fact. Well, you'll see what I'm talking about over in what was a pretty humorous, I guess, technical glitch on Fox News Sunday this morning. Over here.
Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Barrasso, here's how Secretary Kerry described your letter to Iran's leaders this weekend. Here he is. Well, all right. Anyway, he was very unhappy with it, and he said apparently, he's never been better, incidentally, that this was a terrible negotiation and interfering with the effort to make a peace deal. And White House Chief of Staff, and let's put this up, I hope we've got this, Dennis McDonough sent a warning last night that legislation that is being proposed suggesting that Congress must approve a deal would likely have a profoundly negative impact on the ongoing negotiations. Senator Barrasso, is it unreasonable for the White House to say, wait until we see what the deal is, if there's a deal, before you start weighing in?
The president has said only after they sign the deal will Congress get a chance to weigh in. And this letter last night from the White House was to both parties, because this is bipartisan legislation. The letter last night said that the president wants to go first to the Security Council of the United Nations before going to the Congress of the United States. And you have to ask, why is that? Why is he saying both to Republicans and Democrats, sit down and be quiet? And I think it's because it's a bad deal that the president is so eager and desperate because of his legacy to get any deal that he's going to sign a bad one.
Senator.
So that bad deal talking point, that's all over the Republicans. But that part where Senator John Barrasso said that President Obama doesn't want Congress to act until after he's signed the deal, well, that's the way even treaties work that way. The presidential negotiation team signs the treaty, and then they send it to the Senate for ratification. It's always the president negotiates and then the Senate ratifies, although this isn't going to be a treaty. It's going to be an executive agreement, which doesn't have the need for congressional authorization, and it's actually a fairly common thing, as I'll get to in just a couple clips, I think. Although the part that Congress does have to have some input into is the removal of congressional sanctions. Right now, my understanding is that President Obama can waive those sanctions based on the language that Congress used when authorizing the sanctions. But now there's this bipartisan attempt, I think it's the Corker-Menendez bill, to take that ability to waive the sanctions away from the executive branch and bring it back to Congress, or unless Congress does nothing, then it would automatically be authorized, or I'll get into that a little more. But first I want to show Senator Ben Cardin, who was also on Fox News Sunday, defending that Congress is going to have some role while also trying to defend the White House position over in this clip.
Action in regards to the sanctions. I do think Congress has a role to play, and there's a bipartisan effort for how Congress should review any agreement reached by the president in regards to the Iran sanctions, because we imposed the sanctions, the Congress of the United States.
But wait a minute on that, because if there's a deal The White House says it won't be a treaty. It will be something called an executive agreement. And this weekend, Secretary Kerry, and boy, I hope that we see this one, was very clear about what that will mean.
As far as we are concerned, the Congress has no ability to change an executive agreement.
So he's saying, you know, once that's signed, you guys are out of it. And I want to get back to Senator Barrasso's point, because at the same time, the White House is saying, and Dennis McDonough does in the letter, we're going to take this to the UN and ask them, if we get a deal, to lift sanctions. So what do you think about this idea? Yeah, we're going to put it to a vote at the UN, but Congress, per Secretary Kerry, is going to have to stay out.
The president has certain powers as president of the United States. The Congress has powers as the legislative branch. We respect both branches. The president has every right to enter into agreements. Every president has done that in major policy agreements with other countries and multinational agreements. He has every right to do that. Ultimately, the Congress is the policy arm of government. We have the right to pass legislation. We can counter what the president has done. We can support what the president has done. In regards to Iran, we have a common objective, and that objective is to prevent Iran from having the capacity for a nuclear weapon.
So you can see there, Senator Ben Cardin didn't quite delineate it as well as he might have, but that Congress has the power of the sanctions, and Congress can also pass legislation that might supersede an executive agreement. But there have been like dozens of these executive agreements. Unfortunately, over on Fox News Sunday, they didn't really talk about the dozens of executive agreements. They did talk about a couple. Chris Wallace used that in sort of, I don't know if this is a confrontational question or a softball question, because he only used two examples of former executive agreements. And then he let Senator John Barrasso do what is, I guess you could call the switcheroo, where he points out that the last time there was a Republican president, Democrats had the opposite view, without also pointing out that Republicans also had the opposite view, which always seems to happen in these kinds of cases about executive power. And you can see, let me make sure I click on the right one here. Right, this is clip number 27, right here.
Agreement entered into with the president and other countries. The president has the right to do that. Congress can pass laws, and if those laws become effective, those laws control.
Senator Barrasso, for all the GOP outrage about this arrangement and an executive agreement, the fact is it isn't so unusual. Let's put up some history on the screen. The 2012 strategic partnership that President Obama worked out with Afghanistan was an executive agreement. And so was the 2009 Status of Forces agreement that President Bush negotiated with Iraq. So what's the difference?
Well, when Barack Obama was in the Senate and Joe Biden was in the Senate, they co-sponsored legislation that said the Bush arrangement with Iraq had to come to Congress. This is my concern. A world where Iran has a nuclear weapon is less safe, less secure, and the concern is that this is going to be a bad agreement. We were supposed to actually dismantle Iran's capacity for a nuclear weapon, and now the president has gotten to a point where, no, it's just about delaying. It's not about stopping. It's about managing. So those are the concerns that I see a bad agreement coming. I think that we are seeing Iran taking more and more power, and across the whole Middle East, they have this arc of dominance that is including not just Iraq, but Iraq, as well as Syria, all the way to the Mediterranean.
Let me if I can.
So, yeah, there you can see how Senator John Barrasso and Senator Ben Cardin dealt with this whole issue of when Congress should assert its authority. And I actually want to show a couple Democratic senators taking up that same issue. And there was a little bit of news over on NBC's Meet the Press where Chuck Todd had on Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat, supporter of President Obama's negotiations, but he may not be willing to wait until June. You know, this month the Obama administration is supposed to finish up the framework for the agreement, and then the final agreement with all the details is supposed to come in June. And President Obama, in this letter to the Senate, basically told them to hold off until June, and also kind of was responding negatively to that 47 senator letter from the Republicans to Iran, but also told them to hold off till June. And it sounds like Senator Tim Kaine may not be willing to hold off till June, even though he doesn't side with the 47 senators, as you can see from NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
Let me go to you here because there's a letter this morning from the White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough on behalf of the White House. It's addressed to Senator Corker, and it has to do with potential legislation that you are also a co-sponsor to that has to do with Congress's role in approving a nuclear deal. Here's what Dennis McDonough writes. We believe that the legislation would likely have a profoundly negative impact on the ongoing negotiations, emboldening Iranian hardliners. Moreover, if congressional action is perceived as preventing us from reaching a deal, it will create divisions within the international community, putting at risk the very international cooperation that has been essential to our ability to pressure Iran. What do you say to the president, who clearly doesn't like this legislation that you too are a co-sponsor of?
Chuck, I'm a proud co-sponsor of the legislation, and look, the White House is frustrated with Congress because Congress has taken action in the last few weeks showing an unacceptable level of contempt for the office of the president. However, let's be realistic here. The deal that is being negotiated with Iran is about what will Iran do in order to get out from under congressional sanctions. And so it is unrealistic to think that Congress is not going to be involved in looking at a final deal. I am a pro-diplomacy senator, and I have supported the negotiations to this point. But any deal that touches upon the congressional statutory sanctions is going to get a review of Congress. And the only question is, are you going to have a constructive, deliberate, bipartisan process, or are you going to be rushed and partisan? We've seen the wrong way to go about it last week. I hope we will approach it in the careful and deliberative and bipartisan way.
Well, it's clear the White House is afraid you guys may start voting on this legislation as early as March 24th, later this month, before the end of the month. It sounds like the White House is hoping you wait until if there's a framework announced in the next 10 days, then the final deal that you guys don't start talking about this until June. Are you willing to wait that long before you and Senator Corker decide to enact this bill?
You know, Chuck, there's no reason to wait till June on our bill. All our bill does is sets up the process under which Congress reviews a deal. And here's what it does. If the White House gives sanctions relief under executive sanctions, they have complete authority to do that without Congress. If they want to give international sanctions relief and can convince partners to do that, they can do that without Congress. Only when they touch the congressional sanctions must Congress get involved. And we have a 60-day period either to approve the congressional sanctions relief, disapprove it, or take no action, and no action is defined as approval. This is a very bipartisan and deliberative approach to looking at something that is fundamentally about our nation's security interests, and if they're going to unwind congressional sanctions, Congress is going to be involved.
So you can see there, Senator Tim Kaine is saying that he can pass his bill with Republican Senator Bob Corker before June because it just sets out the process. Like I said, there's sort of this opt-out provision, or whatever you want to call it, where if Congress does nothing, then the president has the authority after the 60 days. But that 60-day delay could be a problem. And I want to show one more Democratic senator. This is one of the last two clips on the Iran topic. This is Senator Joe Manchin, who I see a lot on Fox News. He's one of the most conservative, right-wing of all the Democratic senators. I guess that makes him a center-left or center-center. I don't know. I think he may be center-right. And he's from coal country also, which puts him at odds with a lot of important Democratic issue, well, you know, with the whole environmental movement. Anyway, here he is, not willing to sign on to what you saw from Senator Tim Kaine when he was appearing on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
The White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, has written the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Corker, and asked him this morning to hold off on any legislation on Iran or this deal on the issue of whether or not a nuclear deal can be reached until at least June. Does that sound right to you? Because I know that Senator Tim Kaine says that probably you can't wait that long, and he's the Democrat. He wants Congress to vote on this.
Well, let me just say this, that Democrats and Republicans alike are committed not to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It's just, I guess, the approach of how we go about it. We've got to speak with one voice. Now, we can speak within the process that we have and let the White House and the State Department know how strongly we feel about something, against it or for it. Perfect example, Bob, was back when the State Department came over and tried to explain to us why they wanted to start bombing Syria, if you recall that. Not that long ago, a year or two ago. I, as a Democrat, spoke out loudly against that. I thought all it did was light the fuse for the Third World War. And basically all of us, Democrats and Republicans, who felt strongly that we shouldn't drop the bomb, we were able to succeed, and the president was able to negotiate with Russia to remove the chemical weapons. That did not take an approval of Congress, but we were heard. This same process should be used now, and what we need to do, I signed a letter with Bob Menendez and other senators basically saying, let's see how far you've progressed on the end of March, if we have a deal in the making, and then at the end of June, if we don't have a deal at hand, we will double down on sanctions. But we're still allowing the White House and the State Department to do their job.
So, I don't know, end of March, before June, it seems like there may be a conflict between the President and the Congress as to what the schedule of the lifting of congressional sanctions. You know, as you saw Senator Tim Kaine explain, there are UN sanctions, there are executive sanctions, there are other country sanctions. None of those have to do, those can all be in the executive agreement with Iran that doesn't have to be given an up or down vote by Congress. But Congress does have authority over, or may pass this law saying that President Obama can't waive the congressional sanctions and that they get a chance to vote it down or do nothing and then give President Obama a chance to get rid of them. But I want to show one more clip on the Iran topic, not on these nuclear negotiations, which have been kind of abstract in a lot of ways. This has more to do with facts on the ground. How is the conflict with between U.S. hegemony and Iranian hegemony going in terms of facts on the ground? And this may have to do, they discuss in a clip I'm not really showing, I decided not to show, may have to do with the decision of the U.S. not to put boots on the ground in Syria and Iraq. That vacuum has been filled by, who would you think? Iran, as Bill Neely reported on NBC's Meet the Press with a handover from Chuck Todd this morning over here.
Deal actually curb Iran's growing influence in both Iraq and the wider Middle East. NBC's chief global correspondent Bill Neely actually joins me now from northern Iraq, where Iranian militias have joined the fight against ISIS. And Bill, that very point, Iraq is making some real progress against ISIS over the last couple of weeks. But could they have been doing it without the help of these Iranian militias?
I think the answer is no, Chuck. Iran's role in Iraq has never been so visible. Those Iranian-backed militias are everywhere. Their colors are everywhere, 20,000 men. And Qasem Soleimani, who's head of Iran's most elite forces in Tikrit, he's directing dozens of Iranian officers operating drones, artillery and rocket systems. Now, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister says all of that shows Iran is taking over Iraq. And it's true that Iran's militias are answerable not to Baghdad, but to Tehran. And it's ironic, Chuck, that in the 1980s, Iran and Iraq fought a terrible war to a stalemate with 1 million dead. I mean, you could argue Iran is now winning the fight, if you like, winning the war for a broken Iraq.
The old...
So, yeah, that's the facts on the ground and what's going on with Iranian influence in Iraq, because as I showed in with clips on a previous show back a few weeks ago, a lot of the fighting by the so-called Iraqi army is actually being done by these Shiite militias, which have questionable human rights records and are actually in a lot of ways counterproductive, because part of their goal is to win over the Sunni populations where the ISIS forces have been successful, to win them over and show them that the central government in Iraq, the Shiite central government in Iraq, is better than these Sunni, quasi-terrorists. and human rights violations is not the way to make that point. And that's the last clip I want to show on the whole Iran topic, even though it was mostly about a conflict between the Obama administration and Republicans in Congress. And speaking of those types of conflicts, the next topic I want to cover is the ongoing so-called controversy of the Hillary Clinton emails. Hillary Clinton had a press conference this last week, which I watched. I'm not going to show any clips from that. It wasn't that long. You can find it all over the internet. But I am going to talk about it a little bit and show several clips. First, 3 clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, all in succession. First, I'm going to show Bill Maher making fun of the scandal and how it's not really a scandal, and then arguing both with Arianna Huffington in one clip, and then in the third clip it'll be arguing with Sharyl Attkisson about whether it's a scandal or not a scandal. First, here's Bill Maher making fun of the scandal in his monologue on Friday here.
Speaking of stupid, Emailgate has entered its second week. Did you see Hillary's press conference this week? Oh, it was... She was defending her use of using a private email account, and it was riveting television. If you consider someone in a pantsuit talking about serving servers for an hour to be riveting television, you know, it's not really that complicated. Hillary said, yes, look, looking back, I should have probably used 2 email accounts or 2 servers, whatever, one official and one for private, but I just wound up using one out of convenience. Same reason I stayed married. It's such a typical Clinton scandal, right? Stage 1, they broke a rule nobody ever heard of. That isn't exactly kosher, but it doesn't really affect anybody's life. Stage 2, Republicans say that this rule was the keystone to our entire way of life. And if we let it go, Mount Rushmore will explode and our guns will melt in our hands. Stage 3, nothing happens. I mean, I want to ask them, what do they think they are going to find in Hillary's email? She's the most boring person in the world. Do they really think they're going to find one that says, I hate America and love scissoring?
So yeah, that's how Bill Maher made fun of the scandal in his monologue, and then in the rest of the show, he ended up arguing with his guests as to whether it was really a scandal or not. Here you can see Arianna Huffington trying to make the argument that it wasn't necessarily a scandal, but it showed that Hillary Clinton wasn't good at dealing with the press, and well, I'll talk about that a little more if you watch it here.
Is anyone familiar with a Republican strategist named Rick Wilson? I never heard of him, but he wrote on Politico about the Hillary email scandal. He said, let's stay out of the way of Hillary Clinton's email fiasco. Let's speak more in sorrow than anger. He's saying, basically, this is a giant problem for her. I feel like they're in the bubble again. That, you know, in the bubble, Hillary Clinton is this lawless monster who has only stayed out of jail by sheer luck. And yet the poll came out today that said she's trouncing all 11 Republican people who they think might run for president. What do you think about that?
Well, basically, the problem is not so much the emails. It's the way that Hillary responds to the press. There is that sense that somehow the press is always out to get her, and she cannot stand it. I mean, you could see it at the press conference. I mean, she was so pissed at the fact that she had to deal with
I
that.
could not disagree more.
You could not?
Absolutely not.
But
She looked like someone who just is used to taking her beating like a man. And I thought, when I watched it, I thought, this is going to serve her well, because that's what America's all about. It's not about issues. It's just, can you take your beating over stupid, infantile bullshit from our stupid, infantile press? And she said, yes, I can. Yes, I can. You have to show me where she looked pissed.
The way she kept repeating convenience, 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 the way she
Well, why-
looked as though she would rather be anywhere else. But
Who
more
wouldn't?
important than that is the fact that she really needs to realize that's how the press is going to be.
Of course.
So you can see the two sides of that argument, even though they're at least politically on the same side, and I mean at least possible supporters for Hillary Clinton, but they have opposite sides of whether this is really a controversy or how much of a negative it is for Hillary Clinton. And then the next clip I want to show is Bill Maher sparring with Sharyl Attkisson, this former reporter who I also see a lot on Fox News, attacking the liberal media. She used to work, I think it was at CBS, and talked about some liberal bias that she encountered with her bosses there. But in this clip, she's talking about whether the liberal press is giving Hillary Clinton a pass or not, arguing with Bill Maher on overtime. And there's a link to the entire, I think it's almost 9 minutes or 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 54 seconds. You can watch the entire overtime. This is like from about 90 seconds in with, like I said, talking, this is the last one from Bill Maher and his show on this topic here.
I find it a little bit strange that normally some in the press who you might think would be coming to Hillary Clinton's rescue right now and saying some of the things that you said, that maybe the email thing is not such a big deal, have latched onto it and really taken a grip and taken a hold.
You're surprised at that?
I am, that some of the liberal media have done it. That would
First
normally
of all,
be defending
I don't
her.
know where you're getting this from, that the media is liberal. The media could give a shit about liberal or conservative. What the media loves is scandal and bullshit.
They like their own brand of scandal.
So the idea that they would ever take a pass on Hillary Clinton when they could...
I worked in the media, so I'm just telling you sometimes from the inside there are considerations.
And I'm
like
telling
that.
you from one who watched it.
Well, you can have the different opinion, but it makes me think that there are people out there who are looking for a different idea and a different plan and would like to see something else come along. I don't know what.
Well, I'm one of them.
And you see Bill Maher at the end, kind of cut it off. He said he's one of the ones who's looking for a different candidate. And in the last two clips at the end of the show, I'm going to show one person who may be one of those alternatives to Hillary Clinton. But I want to show a couple other clips before that. First, that was a pretty serious discussion on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher in their overtime segment. But there are some kind of comic moments in the Sunday shows this morning discussing this. First, sort of the lesser comedian, I guess, is James Carville. Well, he's always kind of comedic. And you could see when he was discussing it, I guess he must have been really affected by the fact that yesterday was Pi Day, and his argument in favor of Hillary Clinton, which I don't think really is that great an argument. And it took me a while to even understand what it was over here.
Yeah. What this is the latest in a continuation. And if you take it all and you put it together and you subtract 3.1415 from pi, you're left with not very much. And that's what, at the end of the day, so the Republicans can't pass a budget. All right, we got another investigation, just like we had the Whitewater, just like you go through the Foulgate, you go through Travelgate, you go through 7 or 8 different congressional committees. And you wonder why the public is not following this? Because they know what it is. It was something that she did. It was legal. I suspect she didn't want Louis Gohmert rifling through her emails, which seems to me to be a kind of reasonable position for someone to take. So it amounts to, just like everything else before it, it amounts to nothing but a bunch of people flapping their jaws about nothing.
I didn't quite understand that pi thing till he repeated it later in the show, and he was saying that you don't have much left when you subtract 3.1415 from pi. But the first thing I thought of when I finally figured out what he was talking about was, well, what you have left still goes on forever, and it's also irrational, right? It's an irrational number, so that seems like a unintended negative response that you might have to making that analogy to pi, which doesn't really make much sense to begin with. But I think maybe the worst offenses of Hillary Clinton I saw came from former Republican member of Congress Barney Frank, who seemed like he was starting off to have a good defense of the Clintons, and then it went horribly, horribly wrong in just a few seconds, as you can see here.
Do they want to replicate on our side? No, and by the way, I was on the Banking Committee and the Judiciary Committee. I was through all of the Clinton investigations, and the fact is there was nothing there except for President Clinton and the oral sex.
Should they hand...
I couldn't believe that was... That seemed like totally went wrong there right at the end of that argument. Is that where he thought he was going when he started making that argument? I hope not. All I can say is I hope not. But speaking of the more serious parts of the Hillary Clinton email scandal, such that it is, I want to show a couple clips of Trey Gowdy, who's the chair of the House Benghazi Special Subcommittee or whatever that's looking into Benghazi, and he was on a couple of the shows this morning. First, I want to show a clip of him over on, let me just make sure I have on NBC's Meet the Press with Chuck Todd, where Chuck Todd tried to get him to explain why he thinks that Hillary Clinton hasn't turned over her emails, or if he has any reason to believe that she's lying, basically. And he actually didn't take the bait, wouldn't say yes, as you can see over in this clip.
Let me start with a basic question on these emails from Hillary Clinton. She says she has turned over all relevant emails from her server. You don't necessarily, it sounds like you have a trust but verified issue with her. But do you actually think she's lying? Do you think she's not turned over certain documents? Do you have a reason to believe she's not turned over certain documents?
No, sir, I would never accuse anyone of lying unless I had overwhelming proof to that effect. I just know this. We don't get to grade our own papers in life, and she had a very unique arrangement with herself as it relates to public records. And it's not just my interest in them. I have a very small subset of her documents, which would be Libya. It's the public record in general that I think she bears the burden of proving that all public records are in the public domain, and that any discrepancies between personal and public, that she reconciled or resolved those discrepancies in a fair way.
So that was fairly reasonable, although you did see some of his talking points about how Hillary Clinton graded her own paper or made a deal with herself. There are some sort of more unreasonable talking points, given that, even if she had, well, I'll get into that more in a minute, but I want to show a clip of Trey Gowdy. He was over on Fox News Sunday, and he made those same talking points over and over again. But when Chris Wallace asked him if he thought Hillary Clinton had broken any rules or laws, his answer, I guess it was kind of self-deprecating, but it seemed like a pretty big admission, as you can see over in this clip.
In her news conference, Clinton said that she has complied with every rule, every law during the time that she was Secretary of State. As a former federal prosecutor, do you believe that to be true, sir?
Chris, I was a very mediocre prosecutor, and I did no federal records cases. I'm going to have to let smart lawyers decide whether or not she complied with the law or not. I know this. I have been asked to find out what happened before, during, and after Benghazi, and I need her records to do that, and I cannot take her lawyer's word that he went through and used all the right search terms. I mean, that's one question she didn't answer, is how did you search for public records? How did you reconcile personal versus public? So there are a lot more questions, and we're going to have to go to her to get the answers to them. I don't want to have a second conversation with her. And 2 weeks ago, we weren't planning on having a second conversation with her, but she had an arrangement with herself as it relates to public records, and that's why you and I are having this conversation.
Yeah, you saw that. She had an arrangement with herself talking point that I heard repeated also. But that whole question about how it's Hillary Clinton's fault that we're here, and that he didn't want to be here, that was a question that Chris Wallace then posed to Representative Adam Schiff. I showed earlier that at the end of his interview, Chris Wallace let him talk about Iran and the Iran letter briefly, but it was mostly about Hillary Clinton emails, and here you can see how Adam Schiff answered whether we'd be here or not anyway in this clip.
Adam Schiff of California, What do you think about his response? But whatever happened here is all on Hillary Clinton.
Chris, we would be exactly where we are regardless of what Secretary Clinton did with her emails. The reality is that we haven't been talking about Secretary Clinton in the committee because they wanted to put off her testimony as far into the presidential cycle as possible, and this is only the most recent justification for that. We have been asking for her to come in. She has volunteered to come in and testify. So I think this is really, unfortunately, just an effort to push this as far into that campaign as possible.
And I think that is a good answer about we'd be here anyway. And I'm going to show next Adam Schiff's answer to about letting Clinton's lawyer decide. And Adam Schiff starts to give this answer that I agree with about how even if she had 2 emails, she would have still had to decide what to put in the State Department email and what to put in the personal email. And Chris Wallace actually makes a kind of interesting point about how she gets to do it in retrospect, which is an advantage, which I hadn't really thought of. And I guess Adam Schiff hadn't either, because then he goes back to that talking point I just showed about how we would have been here anyway, which doesn't completely answer that question over in this clip.
But wait a minute here. I mean, doesn't it bother you that Clinton and her lawyer by themselves decided which of those 60,000 emails were public and government and turned over and which were private, which she deleted? Is that your idea of transparency?
Chris, let's say that she did it exactly the way that we would like, that she had a separate email account for her government emails and for her private. We would be in exactly the same place because people would be saying, well, how can we trust that she only used the official email account when she was supposed to,
Forgive me, but I'm not sure it would be exactly the same to the extent that there would have been a contemporaneous record because she would have been sending these, you know, there's a different vantage point in 2015 than there might have been in 2009, 10, and 11 as she was sending these emails on a government account,
Chris, I think
which she didn't have.
You're giving our committee way too much credit. We'd be exactly where we are because the whole purpose of this committee is really Secretary Clinton. It has long since been about anything else. So we would be in the same place. My chairman, who I respect a great deal, would be saying the same thing. We can't let Secretary Clinton grade her own papers, whatever that means. We can't let her have decided which to put on the official email and which to use for her private email. So we need that server anyway.
So you think this was adequate transparency on her part?
I think that we ought to handle this situation exactly as we did in a very similar situation in the last administration. And that is when we learned that the President's Chief of Staff under George W. Bush and about 80 other many senior White House officials were using the Republican National Committee email server for official business. We didn't go and say, we demand to have that server. We need to get the Republican server to an independent arbiter. No, we said we're going to have people certify with us that they've given us the documents. We're going to talk with them about how they did the searches.
But wait,
we're going to do all the same
things I was going to ask you about
that we should be doing.
And I don't want to go into that whole history of that, what happened in the Bush administration with the firing of the U.S. attorneys and that emails on the RNC server. But I want to show one more clip. This is from a different Democrat who's also on the House, I think government oversight, whoever it is that's overlooking the Hillary Clinton Benghazi thing. And this is Elijah Cummings. He also defends Hillary Clinton. I believe he was on CBS's Face the Nation this morning. This is the last clip on the Hillary Clinton email so-called scandal this morning here.
Let's talk a little bit about the other big story of the week, and that is the Hillary Clinton emails. Clearly, I mean, if you cut to the chase, basically what was going on here, it seems to me, is that Hillary Clinton did not want to leave a paper trail, and so she set up these various procedures and so forth. Do you think she is the best judge of what ought to be made public and what ought to be part of the government record?
Well, Bob, every federal employee under federal regs has the responsibility to determine what's personal and what's official. She made that judgment. I listened to her carefully, and I believe her. But Bob, if we have issues with Hillary Clinton, we have to keep in mind, number one, she's been extremely cooperative with our committee. She agreed to come in as early as last December, and so she's willing to come in under oath. and testify as to the emails, how she selected the one she did. And we ought to have her come in, not only to testify about the emails, but also to testify about Benghazi. By the way, just last Friday, her lawyers contacted Trey Gowdy, the chairman, and yours truly, and urged us to release the 850 pages of emails that we now have. And hopefully Trey will agree to that, and we'll make that happen.
So hopefully I won't be talking about this so-called scandal next week, but I think it will be dragging on for a while. And I just want to show a couple quick clips of a possible alternative to Hillary Clinton. As I promised, Jim Webb was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And first I want to show George doing a quick intro on his background and talking to him about the possibility of his campaign at the beginning of the interview over in this clip.
I think I can safely say that I'm still the only person ever elected to statewide office in Virginia with a union card, 2 Purple Hearts, and 3 tattoos.
That is Jim Webb on the trail this week, running what may be a most unconventional run for president. He's an unconventional guy. Vietnam War hero, Reagan's Navy secretary, writer of 10 books and a film, too. He left the Senate after 1 term.
Your early support will be crucial as I evaluate whether we might overcome what many commentators see as nearly impossible odds.
So that announcement of a possible run for the White House took many by surprise. The question now, is he serious about challenging Hillary? And will Democrats respond to this call?
Will you have the courage to provide a voice in the corridors of power for those who otherwise will have no voice?
And Jim Webb joins us now. Welcome back, Senator.
Good to see you.
So we saw the video. We saw your speech to the Firefighters Union. You're going to South Carolina this week. What are you up to exactly?
Well, we're actually truly exploring whether it is possible to conduct a viable campaign in this present environment where money is flooding the political process.
Is it possible?
I think it might be. We're listening. We've been around. We've got a lot of support, through people coming across emails, internet, and for me, we need to be focusing on the dysfunction that's occurred in our economic system, and also when you look at this issue that you were just discussing with the Iran situation, there are the true constitutional challenges in the relationship between the president and
I want to
Congress.
ask you about both.
Now, I haven't been that excited about Jim Webb in the past because I've mainly seen him as running to the right of Hillary Clinton on defense and foreign policy with his military background and all. But you heard a little in that answer about how he may be running to the left of Hillary Clinton on economics and the divide between the rich and the poor. And that's the last clip I want to show when Jim Webb kind of explicated what he means in that whole area in the last clip of the night for you all. Thanks for watching along with me, and I've been reading your comments along the way. I'll have a couple last words to say after you watch it here.
Economics as well. In that speech we showed, you also talked about, quote, powerful financial interests spending billions to elect people who think the current drift toward a permanent aristocracy is okay. Flesh that out a little bit. Who are those interests, and how are they encouraging a permanent aristocracy?
Well, I think if you see what has been happening to our country over the past 20 or 25 years or so with the economic model. First, the model itself has broken apart. The traditional model has broken apart. The employment model that was based on full-time employment, manufacturing base, taking care of your working people, fell apart a lot when the manufacturing sector itself was hurt so bad over the past 20 years. But the other thing is, you're seeing that if you have capital, if you have assets, you're doing pretty well. The stock market has almost tripled since April 2009. If you don't, and this is particularly true right now with the generation that is coming into full adulthood, they don't have that model anymore. They were doing part-time jobs, consultancy jobs. They've got student loans to pay off. They're wondering whether they're even ever going to be able to own a home. How can you fix it? You've got to level the playing field in terms of how we take care of working people. Full-time, good jobs. I think that the system is, in a way, becoming rigged against working people. They're getting these part-time jobs. My oldest daughter's a good example of this. She works for disabled American veterans. She loves her job, but she's brought on as a consultant. She has to pay her own self-employment tax. She doesn't have medical. She doesn't have retirement. And this is becoming a model for the generation that's coming along. The other part of it is the people at the very top clearly have moved away from everyone else in our society and the benefits that they are receiving, largely through stock options and executive compensation that would never have existed 30 years ago when they were measuring corporate compensation by the earnings of a corporation rather than the price of a stock.
I know you've been...
So that's some good rhetoric on income inequality, and it's some, on some of the problems. It's better than what I've heard from Hillary Clinton so far, but I don't think it's necessarily enough. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm way over time. I have some dinner waiting, and I started late, and I appreciate all of you who joined me live. I think we peaked out almost at 150 people, and hopefully next week I won't have all the technical problems, and I'll be able to start the show much closer on time. I've had a much better record lately, but I blew it all with this almost an hour late or over an hour late broadcast today. I apologize for that, and I hope you enjoyed the 41 clips I picked out for you, and they left you more informed about the topics the corporate media thought were important this week. And join me next week hopefully at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.